Canada's climate cult magical thinking, conflation on conflagrations. ENGOs go all out on magical thinking about big oil, Jasper wildfires, and floods. Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society, and recently a group of 80 environmental non-governmental groups issued an open letter to all the premiers and other leaders in Canada, demanding that certain measures be taken to make polluters pay, namely big oil, for the Jasper wildfires. Now, I know you're probably wondering, wow, why wouldn't they be making demands for more water bombers or more firefighters or better thinning of the forests, getting rid of all the deadwood? No, they want to make polluters pay, and they've provided a few pillars of evidence. So I'm going to walk you through the pillars of evidence and deconstruct them for you. So this is very important, and I'll show you why, because there's undue influence behind the scenes that, ordinary Canadians can't really respond to. You don't have $50 million to help you get your message across, right? You don't have over 300,000 followers or members, right? You're just one person, and yet all these climate decisions are being made behind the scenes from these green lobby groups, and I hope I can explain that and show you what I believe to be the evidence that supports that case. So come along with me for a walk in the weirderness. Can't call it the wilderness, it's really the weirderness. So some 80 ENGOs issue a cap and trade demand, as if that will stop wildfires, and they dropped it just before the long weekend. Their demands in a nutshell: enough is enough, they say. Following the devastation in Jasper, we ask our federal and provincial governments and all party leaders to stop playing politics with our health and safety. Urgent action must be taken to hold the oil and gas industry accountable for the devastation it causes. We must end our collective dependence on fossil fuels while supporting workers and communities and ensuring social dialogue through this transition. What is needed is meaningful cooperation across jurisdictions to regulate and cap the industry's climate pollution, ending the flow of private and public funds to oil and gas, redirecting them to affected communities and those currently dependent on fossil revenue, and regulating the financial institutions bankrolling fossil fuel projects. And here's Jasper in ruins. But that's weird, isn't it? There's no request for water bombers or firefighters. No fossil fuels means there's no wildfire fighting. There's no ability to evacuate people in danger. There's no modern medicine. What are they thinking? They're conflating conflagration. They are thinking oil and gas products burn, therefore wildfires are caused by the burning of fossil fuels. And it makes perfect sense to some people, but not to everyone. This is an unfounded magical thinking premise that climate change causes bigger, hotter, more frequent wildfires due to oil and gas emissions. So these groups claim that reducing emissions, starting with Canada's biggest polluters, is key to preventing fires from getting worse and protecting our loved ones and our collective health and safety. The science shows that climate change driven by the burning of fossil fuels makes wildfires bigger, hotter, and more frequent. Well, that's funny, because the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says the IPCC has not detected or attributed fire occurrence or area burned to human-caused climate change. Wow, that's definitely two different points of view. Here's what Dr. Judith Curry has to say about this kind of thinking. Thinking that catastrophes like major hurricane landfalls, massive forest fires will be cured by eliminating fossil fuel emissions is laughable. Well, it's not really funny. Thinking that eliminating fossil fuel emissions will solve the problem of extreme weather events is very sad, sort of on the level of doing rain dances. Everything that goes wrong, they blame on fossil fuel-driven climate change. Imagine how surprised they would be if we were to ever be successful at eliminating fossil fuel emissions, and then we still had bad weather. So here's the evidence that they present. There are 4 pillars, essentially. There's a non-peer-reviewed paper, which is titled Climate Change More Than Doubled the Likelihood of Extreme Fire Weather Conditions in Eastern Canada. There's a pay-for-play paper written by climate activists of the Union of Concerned Scientists. There's a fire intensity claims by the activist Climate Atlas, which uses the implausible scenario RCP 8.5 as the business as usual scenario. You can see that here. And they rely on a public opinion poll, which was sponsored by the activist group Clean Energy Canada. So let's go through the detail of some of these. So pillar number 1, the non-peer-reviewed paper has no mention of massive bug and beetle infestations or fuel load from deadwood. So before I got our wildfire consultant to send all kinds of bits and pieces that are in here, I just did a quick search for things like beetle, pine beetle, longhorn beetle, pest, standing deadwood, infestation, deadwood. Well, no exact match. Pest, 1. And there's so many authors, so few facts. That's very concerning. And who are all these people with the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center in The Hague in the Netherlands? Well, here they are. None of them appear to be climate scientists. And of course, the faulty premise of pillar number 1 in the non-peer-reviewed paper, they claim that climate change made the cumulative severity of Quebec's 2023 fire season to the end of July around 50% more intense, and the seasons of this severity at least 7 times more likely to occur. Peak fire weather like that experienced this year is at least twice as likely, and the intensity has increased by about 20% due to human-induced climate change. But when you look at the statistics of the monthly fire starts from the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center, you find that, you know what, there's really not a huge difference between the 10-year average, is there? And of course, there was a huge amount of area burned in 2023. But in science, we call this an anomaly. And you see, in general, the trend is downward, right? Until this 1 year. And what happened in 2020? Whoa, hardly anything burned. I wonder why that is. So if we look at this area of Quebec, you can see that there are infestations that have left large fuel loads, and we'll focus on the spruce budworm. So it's a native species. The spruce budworm is considered the most serious pest of fir and spruce forests in eastern North America. And you can see what it does to trees. It just slowly kills them. And you can see that it has encroached a great deal on Quebec. This is a bit fuzzy of a map, but that's what I have. In the paper, there were no consideration of fuel types because that significantly affects the type and intensity of fires. So this comes from advanced fuel type modeling. So there's M3 and M4 fuel types, which are dead balsam, fir, mixed wood, leafless, and green. Spruce budworm killed balsam fir. So this fire is in northeast Ontario, which is right next door to Quebec, as most of you know. Fire behavior depends on many factors. So here's another fuel type, C1, spruce lichen woodland. And this shows you how these trees are separated by the lichen, which just roars along like a burning carpet. The boreal forest burns to renew itself. So this gives you a glimpse of a Big Fish Lake, Footnear Lake Forest in northern Alberta, where the boreal spruce are going up in flames. And this document shows us that after mortality, spring fires in this fuel type behave extremely vigorously, with continuous crowning and downwind spotting, while summer fires are hampered by the proliferation of green understory vegetation. But this was not a summer fire, this was a set of spring fires. And spruce budworm in Quebec is significant in terms of an infestation. By 2019, over 9.6 million hectares of forest in Quebec has suffered moderate to severe defoliation. And here we have budworm chewing its way to Maine. Also, C1 and C2 fuel loads would have dominated. So this is spruce, lichen, woodland, and boreal spruce. And you can see by the red line that this type of fuel is all across the boreal forest, and the black line shows the area of these fires. And though the authors try to make it sound like this has never happened before, it's obvious that large fires have burned here recently and frequently. So the sort of orangey shade is burned areas from 1972 to 2022, and the red is the burned areas in 2023. And of course, arson also played a role, as did lightning. So Quebec man who blamed the 2023 wildfires on government pleads guilty to setting 14 fires. There's more detail here, but more than 700 forest fires burned over 4.5 million hectares of Quebec forest over the summer, according to the province's Forest Fire Service, which said 99.9% of the fires were sparked by lightning. Now, the study in question focused on the period from June the 1st to the 25th, 2023. So I went to the Natural Resources Canada interactive wildfire maps, and I just pulled every 4 days the fire weather risk. So these give you kind of a composite index of sort of humidity, wind, dryness. There's a number of factors involved to create these maps that would forecast for the next day to help the firefighters understand what they're up against. And you can see, actually, Western Canada was blazing red, so was Yellowknife. Here, BC is blazing red. And this was amber. It's in a danger zone, but you can see that how this progresses over the period, that it became very, very hot and dry down east toward the end, and then they had some rain. So you can see this fluctuates a lot. But within that paper, there's absolutely no synoptic scale. So if you're going to talk about wildfire and fire behavior, weather in meteorology are critical to the discussion. And it's actually ironic that the government page echoes what the activists say in their letter. It's almost like they're practicing on each other to get the public to comply with whatever they want to do. And even though the climate activists echo the government, they ignore the Canadian government data on deadwood. And again, they say, they're referring to this attribution study. They found that wildfire-prone weather conditions in Quebec were 50% more intense because of climate change caused by human activity, while the peak intensity recorded was 20% higher. So, pillar number 2, pay for play paper by the climate activists at the Union of Concerned Scientists. And you can see here that the lead author said drawing the links was part of her motivation, because she's trying to draw links between the accountability of big oil and wildfires. That's called motivated reasoning. So she's trying to quantify the contribution of major carbon producers to increases in vapor pressure deficit and burned area in western U.S. and southern Canadian forest. So This is a little video that she has. If you want to go and have a look at it, you can see that most of the scientists involved in this are activist scientists from the USA. And here's the Union of Concerned Scientists, a bit of background about them. So it looks like they're really activists, and scientists are supposed to be objective and dispassionate. And they've drawn criticism from across the political spectrum as an activist group that uses science to suit an unscientific political agenda. And they've tried to get climate change so-called deniers investigated. They lobbied state attorneys general to launch fraud investigations. They've intimated their support for prosecuting oil and gas executives for spreading climate disinformation and not stepping out of the way of climate action. So they're very much an activist group. But let's talk about vapor pressure deficit. First of all, it's a transient condition. And secondly, you would think that a place with very little vapor pressure would be someplace like this, and you're right. It does increase wildfire risk, and we can see that on this chart, which is from Jasper Park, and it shows that at the end of June, the vapor pressure deficit became extreme, and this also had a wind drying effect of a 9 kilometer per hour wind. So it's not relative humidity. It's, let's see, the USDA-FS refers to it as the Hot, Dry, Windy Index. But are you telling me that big oil is not responsible for this safer metric of vapor pressure deficit, but suddenly on June the 29th, big oil becomes responsible for this? That's just ludicrous. In fact, numerous factors drive vapor pressure deficit, such as sea surface temperatures, nothing to do with big oil or human-induced GHG-driven climate change. And this is probably a more scientific paper that you should have a look at. And you can see here that there's a correlation of vapor pressure on sea surface temperature and the 70 millibar heights, the difference in the vapor pressure, the saturation, and the actual. So these are over months of the year: October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, and July, August, September. So you can see this is the VP difference, the saturation, and the actual. We don't have time to discuss more of the details of that, but you can read that paper at your leisure. And sea surface temperatures relate to the El Niño-La Niña cycle. And also, subsurface geothermal activity drives sea surface temperatures. And Professor Wis Yim has done a lot of work on this. We have a couple of pieces by him on our website, on our blog. So he's showing here the Hunga and Wolf volcanoes, and they're dumping really super hot lava into the sea. And so he did this study showing the effects of this lava in the sea on the warming of the sea surface temperatures. Now, in that study, Dahl et al. Ignore the fuel load facts of tragedies like Camp Fire. So they were trying to lay the blame for the Camp Fire tragedy at Paradise in California on vapor pressure deficit, and that certainly may have been a factor. But if you read this editorial, it's very, very sad. But it foretells this tragedy because the area surrounding Paradise had many sort of valleys and gullies that were filled with dead load fuel. And of course, where is it located? It's located in the extreme fire hazard risk zone. So if you're going to be living in a place like that, then the fire-wise and fire-smart measures you must take have to be scrupulously observed, and they were not. Not to blame the people. It's a huge tragedy, but big oil didn't cause it. And of course, there were very big wildfires before. So in this paper, they're talking about 8 major fires in Quebec: 1717, 1760, 1797, 1816, 1823, 1870, 1923, 1944. Sounds like they're quite frequent. And in California, this paper is about prehistoric fire area, but Stevens and co. found that approximately 1.8 million hectares burned annually in California prehistorically. That's pre-1800. Our estimate of prehistoric annual area burned in California is 88% of the total annual wildfire area in the entire U.S. during a decade from 1994 to 2004, characterized as extreme regarding wildfires. The idea that U.S. wildfire area of approximately 2 million hectares annually is extreme is certainly a 20th or 21st century perspective. Skies were likely smoky much of the summer and fall in California during the prehistoric period. So pillar number 3 of the ENGO argument is a faulty magical thinking of Climate Atlas. So Climate Atlas makes the claim that there's a vicious cycle connecting forest fires and climate change. Warmer temperatures make fires more likely. That's not really true. It's fuel load, and burning forests releases greenhouse gas pollution that makes global warming worse. Well, that's debatable because it also makes plants grow. So and they go on to say that many aspects of wildfire are out of our control, but as Mike Flanagan, who's an expert in this field, notes, every human-caused fire is preventable. And another person reports that many of the recent fires near Kelowna have been caused by human carelessness. A world of ever-increasing fire risks and consequences will demand more fire bans and forest closures, as well as more innovative and lifelong fire education to reduce the number of human-caused fires. Well, that's constructive, because there are so many human-caused wildfires. So now this is from 2020, and there were 2,816 human-caused wildfires then, and it consumed, this sounds like a lot, 227,389 hectares. But when we compare it, what caused the drop in 2020? Look at this. In 2020, this is the amount of wildland fire hectares consumed, and in the average, it's 2,935,499 hectares. So I wonder what caused that drop. Oh, lockdowns, fewer humans in the woods. And here are the 2023 statistics. So let's look at the relevant part here. Human versus lightning in 2023. So here's a list of some of the reasons why fires start. Most of them are human. You can see in Alberta there were 390 naturally caused fires, 709 human caused. And again, it can be any of these. In Quebec, it's almost an equal number of natural and human caused wildfires that year. And you can see here that almost 4,000 natural wildfires were started and about 2,500 human caused, for a total of 7,000. So just imagine we could reduce many of our wildfire risks and the unbearable smoke just by being more careful. And pillar number 4 is an opinion poll. Look at this. Most Canadians believe the wildfires in Western and Atlantic Canada and Quebec are at least partly due to climate change. So, here's the leading question. Do you believe the recent wildfires in Western Canada, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada are at least partly the result of climate change? Well, partly is not a scientific term, and they didn't define here climate change. Do they mean human-caused or naturally variable climate change? Because it could be just naturally variable climate change, right? And just to clarify, climate change in the IPCC usage refers to a change in the state of the climate that can be identified using statistical tests by changes in the mean and or the variability of its properties, and that persists for an extended period, typically decades or longer. It refers to a change in climate over time, whether due to natural variability or as a result of human activity. So over time. So we're not talking about one summer of extreme weather and fire weather. We're talking about over time. So the question is incorrect. And opinions based on leading questions are not empirical evidence. So now they're claiming that 7 in 10 Canadians have noticed an increase in natural disasters over the past decade and believe it is the direct effects of climate change. But it's not about belief, it's about the evidence. Of course, the public is influenced by media collusion. This group, called Covering Climate Now, has more than 400 outlets worldwide, and their combined audience exceeds 2 billion people. And what they like to do is interview people like the director of Mad Max, who tells them how to make climate fear compelling. That doesn't sound like journalism to me. And in Canada, we have the Climate Coverage in Canada report, which decided that media should cover climate as a crisis, say scientists and journalists. But you know what? It's an opinion poll. And Professor Emeritus D.K. Johnson looked at the review of looked at the report, and he said, obviously the opinions of these people are irrelevant to the question of whether there really is a climate crisis. And further on in the report, they gave the journalists an open mic to say anything they want. Look at the things they're coming up with. These don't sound like journalists. Not to be afraid of climate-denying billionaires. Stop being an echo chamber for anti-science propagandists. Promote climate change to the lead item in newscasts and front page of print and online media. Hold politicians and corporate leaders accountable. You guys are supposed to be reporting on things. Ban all fossil fuel advertising. Stop being afraid to link the climate crisis to the crisis of capitalism. Cover it as an ongoing emergency. It needs daily coverage, like COVID. So the climate crisis in journalism is that indoctrination and dogma is presented as fact. And we have this little video here. And also, Dr. Madhav Kandekar did a whole playlist for us and a full presentation showing that extreme weather events are integral to climate, and they're sporadic, and they're not climate change. But in addition to covering climate now, journos are told how to report extreme weather as climate, even though, as I just told you, climate change occurs over periods of time of decades. So here's this guide for journos, and here's a media report, Western North American extreme heat, virtually impossible without human-caused climate change. And in fact, climate change, human-caused, is the only cause the attribution people care about. So in this, they're talking about the extraordinary heat wave, and this is their claim, as referred to in the previous news item I just showed you, versus the evidence. So you can look at the video explainer here, or you can read the whole story in French, or you can translate it into English. But you can see here, during the heat dome of 2021, there was a very hot area parked on the west coast. But look at all the colder than usual areas. This is a mobile polar anticyclone. It has nothing to do with human-caused climate change. You can see here that there are pockets of extremely cold air, even in Siberia. Nobody reported on that. So it would be good to have a look at the work of Marcel Leroux, and you can also read this work by Jean Van Vliet and Brigitte Van Vliet-Lanois. And just, to take a step back, it's not like there's never been hot weather before. In 1134, extreme drought in the north of France. In June, a hot wind dries Normandy. Everywhere thirsty people flow into streams and rivers, and many drown. In September, in Normandy and elsewhere, many towns and villages were completely destroyed by fire, like Le Mans, Chartres, Alençon, Nogent, and Verneuil. The Sambre dries up in Namur. Tsunami on the coasts of the North Sea in September or October, and one night the sea invades the land to a depth of 7 miles, stunning villages and homes. The disaster affects Flanders and neighboring countries. In December, major floods in Normandy. Floods reach the roofs of houses. In 1135, great heat and widespread drought in France and England. It was so great that the land was burning hot at various locations in France. Pastures and fields are grilled, and there followed a great famine. Lakes and rivers are dry. Heather in the mountains and forests spontaneously ignited by sunlight. In Germany, the Rhine is almost completely dry and can be crossed on foot. The forests are on fire. December 1st, England was swept away by a hurricane. Wow. Well, that's long before human-caused climate change. And so we have this continuous bombardment of media messages like doctors say fossil fuel addiction kills and starves millions. So as this tweeter points out, AP has received funding from anti-fossil fuel groups, and I'll show you more about that as we go on. And here you can see that life expectancy globally and by world regions since 1770, which is about the start of the Industrial Revolution, has accelerated dramatically. We're much healthier, we're much longer lived, and we have many more freedoms thanks to fossil fuels. So the fossil fuel addiction is not killing anyone. You can't have modern medicine without it. So what's going on here? Well, money matters. Most people don't know that many of the signatories to this letter are very big environmental groups. And this is from our report, Money Matters, from 2019. And the information we have shows that the revenues received by the environmental groups and their EnviroLaw counterparts over the period of 2000 to 2018 was over 18 times the revenues received by all federal political parties in Canada, and over 27 times the revenues received by market-oriented institutes. That would be like Fraser Institute or Frontier or whoever. And the revenue received by the Tides organization, which is now called Make Way, by Tides alone is more than the combined revenues of Canada's two largest federal political parties, the Liberal Party of Canada and the Conservative Party of Canada, over that period. So the David Suzuki Foundation's average annual revenues exceed those of the federal New Democratic Party, and 8 environmental groups have annual revenues that exceed those of the governing Liberal Party of Canada. So now you know why so many politicians want to play along with the climate cult. And further to this, these groups work together. They don't appear to work together. When they sign one of these letters, it doesn't appear to be strategized. But if you read Parker Gallant's work on the Strathmere Alliance, you would be astonished. So they note, and this is from a couple of years ago, so it's probably bigger now, the 11 member organizations have over 358,000 members, 420 staff, and annual budgets totaling over $50 million. And they also have an ad agency that put together a special event for them prior to the 2015 federal election, where they had directors from Canada's 12 leading environmental organizations learn from leading market researchers, journalists, and organizers, and agreed to work on shared frames and messages in advance of the 2015 federal election. So, I'm not sure if you realize what that means. It means that these groups are constantly coordinating campaigns, and they each take one little slice of the pie. So as you'll see on that list of 80 participants in that letter, you'll find the well-known groups like Stand Earth, Eco Justice, Greenpeace Canada, and Equiterre, and Environmental Defense, David Suzuki and the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, West Coast Environmental Law. Then you'll also find these other little things like For Our Kids Canada, Citizens Climate Lobby, Climate Emergency Unit, Citizens for Public Justice, Music Declares Emergency in Canada, Protect Our Winters, Teachers for Future Turtle Island, Vancouver Co-Housing. Then you get another biggie like Sierra Club BC, Georgia Strait Alliance, Plant-Based Treaty. You get it. So there's lots and lots of these little groups that may not be formally registered charities. They may be nonprofits or some kind of social club, but they are funded usually by like the mothership, like Tides Make Way has been the mothership for the launching of this plethora of ENGOs in Canada for the most part. And like, as you can see, there's a lot of them. But this gives the appearance of, like thousands of citizens really want this to happen, when it's actually a very coordinated, strategic effort by a lot of foreign actors, actually. But this is a domestic actor. So one of the signatories is the Cape Doctors, the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. And for instance, they're funded by the McConnell Foundation. So McConnell has this $10 million piece in BlackRock Global Renewable Power Fund 2, which I presume they want to promote. They want to promote that people should have renewables, right? So they get money back on their investment. And McConnell has funded the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment for almost $500,000. Excuse me. And you can see here, they started doing a campaign choking on wildfire smoke, brought to you by oil and gas. So why is this relevant? Well, if there's a strict cap and trade limit, then oil companies will be forced to buy renewable energy certificates from wind and solar farms. And the companies may also invest in wind and solar to look green. But oddly, modern medicine doesn't exist without fossil fuels. So this is all about money, not health, as stated in the letter. And there's all these big foreign philanthropies that are funding Canadian ENGOs. They funded them a lot in the past. They continue to throw money into Canada, probably a bit less since the Allen inquiry into the tar sands campaign. But you can see here, this is from the work of Matthew Nisbet, who's been tracking them for a long time. So they're paying these environmental groups to be a proxy for their policy desires. And it's called Design to Win. That's their plan. And you can see here that they want to promote actions to limit or oppose fossil fuel industry, $69 million. Promote renewable energy, $140 million. Promote low carbon energy tech, $10 million. These are big, big numbers. And when they're going to these charities, which in turn go to the public and say, please help us, block fossil fuels. Please help us put up more wind farms. Please help us stop natural gas fire. So, of course, people will donate money. And then they can easily double up any of these contributions. And Nisbet reported this back in about 2013, I think it was, he writes that in 2006, several of the country's wealthiest foundations hired a consulting firm, I believe that was McKinsey, to comprehensively survey the available scientific literature and to consult with more than 150 leading climate change and energy experts. They mean activists there. And so the result was this report. And so leading the report was the recommendation that tempering climate change required a strong cap-and-trade policy in the United States and the European Union and a binding international agreement on greenhouse gas emissions. So they've been beavering away at this for years. The report predicted that the passage of cap-and-trade legislation would prompt a sea change that washes over the entire global economy. Well, nobody asked you about that, did they? The report included little to no discussion of the role of government and philanthropy in directly sponsoring the creation of new energy technologies, and the report is additionally notable for the absence of any meaningful discussion of social, political, or cultural dimensions of the challenge. So it's a very utopian plan, and they're funding people for millions of dollars. So everybody's on the bandwagon, but in fact it's sidestepping democracy and the democratic process, and they don't really care about the social, political, or cultural dimensions of what's happening. So again, I return to this. Notice how the focus is on holding big oil accountable for fires that never started. These climate activists appear to be conducting a green trade war against Canada's key revenue and jobs generator. And it seems like they are playing for the other team. So, like, for instance, this water bomber runs on fossil fuels. Who are the biggest oil producers in the world? Well, from this graph of 2023, Canada's number 4. You don't think that these other countries would just love to have our market share? Why do you think this ongoing tar sands campaign, green trade war is happening? Well, it looks like, somebody is trying to get us off the market. So that seems to be the impetus behind this campaign. It really doesn't seem to have anything to do with our health and safety, and it has a lot more to do with putting the boots to Canada's oil and gas industry. And one of the groups involved, one of them which is a signatory and which was started by Minister Guilbeault, is Équiterre. So if you note, Équiterre receives 41% of its funding from the government. So while people are in bread lines at the food bank, living in tents in Canada, these guys are living high on the hog and trying to shut down job-creating industries. And not to mention, they're already a registered charity. They already issue receipted donations, and they also get gifts from other registered charities. So, like I said about groups like Make Way Tides, there's a lot of money that's transferred back and forth between these groups for various projects. So I believe that I have convincingly shown you the collapse of the 4 pillars of the ENGO argument. So pillar number 1, a non-peer-reviewed paper claimed wildfire number and intensity in 2023 in Canada was due to human-caused climate change. That has been refuted. The paper made no consideration of pest infestations, fuel load, human causation due to accident, negligence, arson, and included no synoptic references to weather conditions at the time. Pillar number 2 is a pay-for-play, peer-reviewed paper, rife with motivated reasoning, written by a clique of activist climate scientists of the Union of Concerned Scientists on the emissions of the Big 88 oil and cement companies, allegedly causing increased vapor pressure deficit. That's been refuted because an actual peer-reviewed paper by non-activists shows that the vapor pressure deficit is affected by sea surface temperatures and atmospheric oscillations, and it's unrelated to human-caused climate change. Pillar number 3, the cause of the fire intensity and occurrence claims by activist Climate Atlas, which calls the implausible scenario, RCP 8.5, business as usual, are evidence of human-caused climate change. That has been refuted because the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre stats support Dr. Mike Flanagan's statement that every human-caused fire is preventable. The spate of wildfires are more related to wildland-human interface by negligence or accident, and sometimes arson, combined with enormous fuel loads due to bug infestations. And pillar number 4, a public opinion poll done by Abacus Data for the climate activist group Clean Energy Canada. Refuted. Opinion polls mean nothing. Evidence shows the polls are wrong and are influenced by billionaire philanthropies, funding environmental non-governmental groups, and ENGOs with all their money and social media follower influencers are aligning with the media to push the climate catastrophe narrative for their vested interests in renewables, carbon markets, and cap and trade. Enough is enough of tax-subsidized, foreign-funded ENGOs exploiting Jasper's tragic wildfires to push a green trade war against Canada. And this is from our 2019 Big Green Money report, which shows that millions of dollars have poured into Canada from foreign interests. I'm not saying it's illegal. I'm just saying that there's definitely undue influence in Canada, and these 80 climate organization and justice groups tend to be motivated by this money and the direction they receive from these groups. And factually, CO2 is not a control knob that can fine-tune climate. So I guess the conflating of conflagrations is incorrect. I hope that that's enlightening. I think that this letter, it sounds innocuous, but I think it's actually very, very serious. And is certainly attempting to create a bandwagon effect so that people think, oh, wow, all these 80 groups have signed this, and boy, they have hundreds of people who follow them and support them. We should all jump on the bandwagon. Yes, big oil caused the fire in Jasper. None of that's true. And just imagine, no one could have evacuated from Jasper. 25,000 people evacuated within the space of a few hours. No one could have gotten out without their fossil-fueled vehicles. None of the firefighters could have water-bombed or scooped chopper buckets on the fire. A lot of the heavy equipment that's used to clear fire breaks, you couldn't do any of that without fossil fuels. And of course, in treating people who were hurt or injured or people who have smoke inhalation. So of course, if you don't have modern medicine, then you're back on the kitchen table. And modern medicine is completely reliant on fossil fuels. So, I think this is a very dangerous letter, and I think the fact that it went out before a long weekend when most of the public wasn't really paying attention to it means that it has probably been proliferated by all of the followers of these groups and making its way to various MPs across the country. Meanwhile, you and I are sitting around by the barbecue, with the hot dogs and the burgers and maybe a beer, glass of wine, some pop, whatever, having a nice weekend. And these guys are trying to shut down one of Canada's most important industries, the oil and gas industry. So if you think that we can run a healthcare system without those revenues, if you think that we can run an education system without those revenues, if you think that we can get along with just wind and solar farms, you have to watch many more of our videos because none of those things are true. I hope that this has enlightened you a bit, and please share it. If you'd like to join us, we have a join button on our homepage, and you can donate as well. Memberships are $40 a year or $80 for 3 years. And with the membership, you get our newsletters, our reports, and you can choose which ones you want. Some of them, like extracts, addresses more the climate policy issues that are going on in the world, things that you probably don't read about in the mainstream press, things that are happening with the IPCC. And CLI-SCI is another one of our newsletters. It looks at recent climate science releases and papers. So some people like both, and some are interested in one or the other. And we have other materials that we share with you as well. So if you can help us, that would be great. And if you can, please share our material. Please talk with other people about the things that you've learned here. And if you don't think that these charities are providing a net public benefit, which is what the CRA requires of a charity, then maybe you should contact the CRA and let them know about that. Let them know what your thoughts are on people trying to exploit the tragedy of the Jasper wildfire to force a policy issue on Canadians that I don't think any of you ever voted for. It's circumventing democracy. So thanks very much for listening to my little rant there. It's one thing that really bothers me, as you can tell. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.